Hello, everybody. My name is Louis Aguirre. I'm a member of Sachamama. I'm also a news anchor for the ABC affiliate here in South Florida, Local 10, and the environmental advocate. It is my pleasure to be with you all today to have this very important and spirited conversation about our beautiful planet ocean and the urgent need to restore and protect it. Never has it been more urgent than it is today. We know that it is the great provider, the giver of life, that 50% of the world's oxygen comes from the ocean. 3 out of every 4 breaths that we take comes from the ocean. But it's also our biggest ally as we try to battle and fight against the effects of climate change. It can help us greatly reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and it can also help us greatly reduce our rising global temperatures. It is my honor to be joined this afternoon by this, or today, in this conversation by the Honorable Congressman from Arizona, Raul Grijalva, who also chairs the House Committee on Natural Resources. Congressman, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us here today to have this conversation with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aguirre, and I appreciate it very much. And I want to thank Green Latinos and Sachamama for hosting the event to highlight the importance of the ocean. And as chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, I appreciate and understand the full and critical role that ocean plays in providing for our people and our planet, as you so eloquently stated. You know, the ocean is responsible for every other breath we take. It provides us with food, and it regulates our climate. And it's also been a mitigator on climate change, a critical component in that climate equation. The ocean has absorbed about 1/3 of all human-derived carbon dioxide emissions. It is absorbing already over 90% of excess heat in our atmosphere. And but the consequences we see now in our ocean: acidification, sea level rise, shifting fish stocks, coral reef die-offs, and increased heat that jeopardizes the ocean's ability to continue to provide for us in the future. And the ocean is not just a victim of climate change; it's also, quite frankly, a hero with regard to how we mitigate and remediate and deal with the climate crisis. So, you know, for a long time, I, like many, looked at land-based solutions as to the climate crisis, and largely ignoring the 70% that covers our planet, which is our oceans and our waters. And it's time to recognize that meaningful contribution by the oceans to our climate, and make that part of the overall comprehensive approach toward mitigating the climate crisis. And you know, scientists have found that ocean solutions can provide up to 20% of the annual emission cuts we need by 2050 to keep global temperatures below the 1.5 degree Celsius. And with ocean climate action, we can protect coastal communities and capture and reduce greenhouse gases. And I think importantly to note is to achieve a level of justice for underserved communities. Not all communities deal with climate change equally, and it affects different communities unequally. The territories and freely associated states, Puerto Rico, are particularly vulnerable as islands at the risk of sea level rise, coral and reef die-offs, and extreme weather damage. And I mention that because part of what we need to do is to not make sure we leave anyone behind. That as we approach solutions in tandem with what we're doing as land-based and ocean-based solutions, that we understand that we cannot leave communities behind. Those that would be are being most affected, and we see it in the climate refugees that are coming to migrating across the globe and certainly coming to our country, as an indicator of what we need to do in the long term. And so that's why the bill incorporates tribal and indigenous communities, frontline communities, environmental justice communities, and I mentioned the islands and the territories. We've also added a fee on virgin single-use plastic to fund conservation programs and to reduce marine plastic pollution and decentivize the production of plastic. As it's petroleum-based, we all know that. It never dies, and it continues to make it problematic, and in the long term, hurts our efforts around climate change. So, you know, ultimately, ocean climate action is about recognizing the vital role that oceans play in ensuring the ocean can continue to provide for us. And so I look forward to your questions. It is the legislation that we're promoting. Parts of it are within the Build Back Better agenda, the reconciliation budget. And we see that as a very important down payment for the future in terms of dealing with the climate crisis. So thank you for hosting it. And more importantly, drawing attention to the ocean's role in this humanity lifeline that we are trying to preserve for the future. And so I'm prepared for any questions. And if I'm not prepared, I'll let you know that I can't answer the question.
Well, you know, you brought up some very important.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I think you just said it right then and there. We cannot do this without the ocean. The ocean is our friend and our ally, and we need it. Otherwise, it is not sustainable. We cannot survive what we have created on this planet right now. You alluded to an important piece of legislation that you reintroduced on World Ocean Day, and that is the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act. Can you let us know what the goal of that act is and what does it contain?
The goal of the legislation is something I said earlier, is to have a comprehensive approach from the federal government and how we deal with the climate crisis and how we fight back. And to do it without a comprehensive approach and without fully integrating the response and the attention that oceans need in terms of their own sustainability, but also that sustainability, what it produces in terms of people and the planet as a whole is huge. And that has to be integrated into all planning. And it has to be integrated into the funding that comes forward and the resources that come forward. And the point of this is, I mentioned the fee on taxes. I mentioned fish stock and not overfishing. I mentioned the issue of coastal erosion, not only in the continental United States, but in the islands around us. And that it's a global issue. So we attach all those and put processes in place and begin to empower NOAA as the agency that begins to take the leadership role and does take the leadership role in the mitigation, the remediation, and the building of resilience in our oceans. And that's the bill in a nutshell. It's a complement to what we're trying to do on the land-based side, and it's integrated as a comprehensive package. We did it as a standalone bill only because it had not been dealt with before. And so that's the initiative, and the specifics on it are to protect the bedrock laws, create more marine protected areas, and put an emphasis on what we do to enhance the ocean's role in helping abate and mitigate the climate crisis and the warming of both the ocean and the planet.
Well, let me tell you something. The ocean is dealing with a lot, not just climate change, but as you mentioned, our oceans are being overfished. We have the acidification of our coral reefs. We have global ocean temperatures rising that are contributing to more intensive natural disasters. We're facing stronger hurricanes on a regular basis now. But let's go back to the marine protected areas. I think a lot of people would be shocked to find out that only 7% of the ocean is in fact protected, and that is not enough. As a matter of fact, the number that the World Economic Forum proposed is we need to protect 30% of the ocean. If not, we're going to be out of fish before you know it. And people don't understand that by conserving our fish stocks, we can actually ensure that there'll be more fish to fish in the future to help feed us. I mean, soon the world population will be at 10 billion people. We need to feed all of these people. How important is it to create more marine protected areas? And why is this an integral part of this legislation?
Yeah, a healthy ocean not only provides food, it provides livelihood, it provides well-being, but also, like you said, it's a solution to the climate crisis. And what we're the bill creates a pathway forward for offshore renewable energy. We ban new offshore oil and gas leasing, which is a primary contributor to climate change and a threat to ocean ecosystems and, of course, coastal communities, like we're seeing as we speak along the California coast right now with the spill. And we enhance natural carbon capture, storage in ocean ecosystems like seagrass beds, kelp forests, mangroves, that blue carbon concept that is essential to protect our coastal communities. And why is it so important? Because the increase in the number of marine protected areas, I think, eliminates. It begins to reduce the overfishing that is going on, and this level of overfishing is not only a threat to livelihoods; it's a threat to food in general, food supply in general in the world. And so we see that protection as a win-win, that we are protecting the ocean itself and its contribution in terms of blue carbon, but it also is protecting livelihoods and sustenance for the world population. Those two are not either or propositions. And although much of the corporate fishing industry across the globe see that as an either or proposition, it's not. When one goes, then the other one is going to go. And
100%.
I think that connection is something that we're trying to stress. And by increasing the number of marine protected areas, we're doing just that.
How much support are you receiving on the Hill right now? Have you been able to reach across the aisle and procure bipartisan support for this legislation?
To some extent, particularly in where it is the political viability of coastal erosion, sea level rises. You get support from my Republican colleagues on that, because they see it as a protection device for those areas, and that's fine. That's fine. I think what we're seeing though, and I think that has to do with the global now concentration on oceans, is that more and more members are seeing the connection and the need for an integrated, comprehensive response to climate change, as opposed to doing it in silos, section by section. And you need to, so the support has been dramatically increased in the last year, number one. Number two, some level of bipartisanship, not to the degree I would want or you would want, but some level. And I think that I think what you're also seeing is the anxiety on the part of the public in general, wanting something done about climate change, and now turning to the oceans as also part of the solution. That is occurring as well. And I think that's why we're picking up the support that we're picking up for this legislation, and more importantly, for attention on what we do in terms of our response to climate change with regard to oceans.
Let's talk about the Build Back Better bill, because that includes investments in natural climate solutions. Can you tell us a bit more about how these investments in coastal resilience will help our communities and our climate?
The issue is, for me, is that rising temperatures, the carbon emissions, the acidification of our ocean, the increased heat in there, all that is a threat to all communities. But on the front line is the coastal communities, where issues such as difficult issues as relocation are being dealt with. Two tribes are relocating entire villages because of that rise. and that's over in the northwest of our country. Other communities are having to retreat from where they have been to other locations. And so the difficult work of displacement and relocation is part of this discussion. And that's how we can help these communities extend life for their areas, extend life in general. But that is the main area. But there's another issue too, and that's the frontline communities. Those communities that are poor, those communities that happen to be of color and have historically been the subject of environmental injustice in terms of what gets done in their areas as opposed to other areas, those are the ones that'll suffer the most. And that's where we in the legislation, on all the legislation that we're pushing, think that the Build Back Better is important. The Justice 40 proposition that 40% of the money would be used to address those in frontline communities and EJ communities across the country, indigenous people, the territories and Puerto Rico, as I mentioned. That in itself is an important response. And then I think overall, the EJ function to look at cumulative effect and to look at redressing those issues as well. Those require resources, but they also require process, and they also require legal language. And that's why, regardless of the resources dedicated, I think you still need to codify what we're doing into law so that it is followed, not just for 4 years, but from now on. Because I think this battle that we have with climate change and the crisis before us is not going to end at the end of Biden's administration. It's going to continue. And I think it's important to also codify things into law so that we have a law that we follow from then on.
And what we fail to see is that, yes, we are fighting the battle against climate change right now, but there's also a tremendous amount of economic opportunity as we mitigate the effects of climate change and try to cut our greenhouse gas emissions. How important is that, the economic incentive in using that to help build a bridge so that we have bipartisan support for legislation such as the important piece of legislation you just reintroduced back in June?
Yeah, we're not dealing with the rather what we dealt with like 4 or 5 years ago, as you well know, Mr. Aguirre. We're not dealing with outright denial of climate change right now. We're dealing with delay of dealing with the issue. That's what we're dealing with. That we have all this time. We don't have all this time. And I think one of the urgencies that your question points to is the fact that one of the arguments that comes forward, all these efforts are going to cost jobs. They're going to cost jobs in the fishing industry. They're going to cost jobs in oil and gas. The transition that we have to make is also going to need to be incentivized so that as we're making the transition, we keep people whole economically. We provide incentives to build industries that are going to be resilient for the future and sustainable in terms of our environment. Those, I think, are key, because the argument has always been about you're doing this too fast and you're going to cause this economic downturn. On the contrary, I think if done correctly and you have a robust investment in this agenda, part of which has to be the economic side of it, there is an opportunity for industry there, not only to do well, but to also be able to provide the employment opportunities that are going to be needed in the future. That's part of the transition. Where people are going to work, how they're going to work, and what they're going to work on is part of the climate change change that has to happen. And I think this bill begins to provide that kind of a blueprint for the transition through incentives and through disincentives, like in plastic, and through cooperative agreements, and understanding that the issue is not just a domestic issue, that there has to be international agreements and moving forward, particularly on the ocean front more than anywhere else.
Do you sense that we do have this international coalition that can move similar legislation forward? We all sense the need to protect our ocean. The ocean, actually, it's one ocean. We've subdivided the oceans geographically, but in reality, it's only one ocean, and the ocean belongs to the entire planet.
Well, I'm born and raised in Arizona, so ocean was never part of our vocabulary, but those of you who have had it in your vocabulary, much envy on my part. But yes, and I think that, you know, what's going to happen in Glasgow, which I'm going to go, and what happened in Madrid is to begin to put the focus on oceans, I think is a very important step internationally. And all the countries, including the US, that are signing on are important. Unfortunately, some of the more polluting and emitting countries have not at this point. And that's not good.
That's a big argument. What about China? What about India? That's the resounding echo we hear from the other side.
I think, you know, waiting for a change of mind there is I think too big of a risk. I think the United States has the obligation and the responsibility to lead these partnerships. And I think that is where the pressure on other nations, India, China, and others that are totally dependent on polluted industries for their energy are going to have to come around. And I think that involves the corporate side and the business side and the financial side of it, to incentivize and de-incentivize appropriately going forward in terms of who's getting the financial support and who's not, and where the efforts is being made. You know, I think industry gets it. You know, you see it in this country, the move away from coal. You see it in this country, the move away from fossil fuels extraction. They see the horizon, and I think it's wise that we partner with that movement and incentivize that movement. But yeah, the stickler is going to be for nations that don't want to participate. But I don't think that is an excuse nor a reason for us not to lead and be responsible and work with the 130 other nations that are willing to.
If anything, that should motivate us to be the world leader on this. You know,
good point.
So I want to go back to the corporate responsibility, because that's one of my pet peeves. You know, we're seeing the way, especially the way the fossil fuel industry has really just launched this all-out defense against all kinds of science. They've seen the writing on the wall when it comes to fossil fuels. We all know that burning fossil fuels is killing us, and there's 13 deaths per minute in the world that's attributed to the burning of fossil fuels. We all know it is the single biggest threat to humanity on the planet right now. But I want to talk about plastics for a second right now, because they are now fighting back against any kind of legislation to reduce plastic. We all know that global plastic production is expected to quadruple in the next 30 years. By 2050, according to scientists, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish by weight. I mean, it's dire. You know, 18 billion pounds of plastic in the ocean every year. That's the equivalent of a garbage truck full of plastic being dumped into the ocean every minute of the day. The numbers are astronomical. Congress also recently introduced the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. Are you also included on that bill? And is that also part of your bigger Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act?
Yeah, and it is. And you know, we initiated that with what we have in there in terms of setting a fee and using that money to convert for conservation efforts. But you know, you made a great point. Plastic and other land-based pollutants that are contaminating the ocean. You know, we're dumping tons of plastic into the ocean. 80% of marine pollution originates on land and is dumped into the ocean. And so, yeah, that's part of the relationship in which we can control that. And I really find that, you know, the effort around plastics has been intense. Not only the lobbying, but you know, you can see the corporate donations to my colleagues increasing around this issue more and more as we get closer to election time. The effort to delay any fee on plastics is something that we're fighting back on right now. All that is about trying to retain a grip on something that you're going to lose anyway. And I think that the public in opinion polls around plastic, in opinion polls around charging a fee for plastic, overwhelming support. And I think that's, and if sometimes the public is way ahead of the politicians, and in this instance, they're way ahead of us. And I would hope that that is a signal, but we understand that that's going to be a battle, really. And you pinpointed it very well, Mr. Aguirre. It's around plastics and it's around the precedent that we're setting with the legislation, not necessarily the fee.
It's so important, and many of us are feeling overwhelmed by it. You know, the problems of climate change, the problems of the world's plastic pollution crisis all seem very, very, very overwhelming right now. But in reality, we can't just rely on global leaders and policymakers and conscious legislators such as yourself to fight this fight. All of us are in this battle together. So what are some of the things that we can do to help support you, to support this legislation? What can the average person watching this who is concerned, what can we do to be a part of the solution? Because we're all part of the solution.
You know, the we is what we do individually. And many people are very conscious of what they do individually in terms of, you know, lessening their footprint and lessening their contribution to the to climate change, and much to be admired in individual organizational efforts to do that on a cleanup basis. I think the legislation is also about a preventive and treatment basis that we need to deal with when we deal with the oceans. And that does require a broader policy. That does require enforcement. That does require long-term treatment and revitalization of areas and bringing areas back, ecosystems back. You know, when you have 700 species or more threatened by ocean pollution on a daily basis, all those are legitimate concerns that I think the public understands. And what can we do about it is not to let people that influence these decisions squirt around the issue. They need to be pinned down as to what they're going to do, at what pace they're going to do it, and what they support and don't support. You know, locally here in Arizona, when one community that I live in, Tucson, wanted to pass a penny on a plastic bag tax to be used to fight climate change, the state passed a law that if they did that, they would lose state funding. Yeah. And you know, that's my point, that we have kind of this idea, they've made it an ideological fight when it's not an ideological fight. It's a survival fight. And I think educating each other and not letting elected officials and decision makers off the hook of this issue in terms of avoiding it, I think is something that can be done immediately and now. And it's a generational issue. The younger generation fully understands what they're up against. It's older folks like me that think we have all the time in the world, and we don't.
No, we don't. The clock is ticking. It is ticking louder every single day. As far as the relationship between the constituent and the representative in Congress, how important is that? How important is to have that communication between the constituent and the representative? And does that work? Do you find that if enough constituents contact their members of Congress and say, we support this legislation, is that an effective tool in helping you get this legislation passed?
Yeah, my recommendation to organizations and individuals that is I think it's important to do that work in the district, to have district people that are direct constituents of that representative be the ones that raise the issue and demand some response to those issues. I think that has an effect. That's where you're elected. That's the people you represent. And it's, you know, my odyssey on this issue has changed. It used to be that, you know, you people accused me of crying fire in a crowded theater when it came to climate change. That was 5, 10, 11 years ago. As time has gone further, now it is, I don't get that reaction. I get a different reaction. And this is an opportunity that I've taken to educate, inform, and make sure that, and that's the elected officials' responsibility, make sure that people have the tools and the information to be able to argue their point, or that to be able to convince them that this point of view is a good point of view. That's part of the job too, not just to wait to see what will spring up. You know, elected officials aren't there as potted plants to be watered every once in a while. They're supposed to have ideas and some level of communication with their constituents. It's essential. That's what keeps us in our business. That's who elects us. And hearing from them directly is the most powerful tool that I know of.
So before we let you go, can you tell us where the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act is right now? I know it's being studied by various committees. And how long before this is actually presented as a bill that is voted on the House floor?
Well, we have that. We have a couple of bills, at least 4 or 5 bills that are direct policy bills that direct, and they have some allocation of resources in them, yes, but they direct and they codify things into law. And those bills, the Build Back Better agenda, this whole drama with the Senate around reconciliation and a handful of members of Congress from my party that are having sleepless nights about it. I don't know why, but they are. The policy issue couldn't go into the reconciliation because it has to be about a budget. And so those policy issues are all going to come next around indigenous people, the climate issue, environmental justice for all, and land-based solutions as well. And so, yeah, the next step for our committee is to push those and then demand time on the floor, up or down, from our majority leader, Mr. Hoyer, so that we can take a vote on it.
I mean, with the midterms coming up, do you think timing is everything right now? I mean, it's poised to be a very contentious midterm election again.
Oh, it's going to be it's going to be difficult for my party to hang on to the majority, but I think we can, but we can with not just a track record of what we did with infrastructure and what we did with reconciliation. That is vital and important and a huge change agent for the country. But it's also going to be about how we address the issues that we're talking about today, because there's an underestimation, I said earlier, of where people are thinking right now. And when it comes to climate change and the role of oceans in dealing with that issue, that crisis, I think the public is with us, and it is going to be how we communicate that. So this is, I think, also a good time to bring that forward, because I think the public will support it, and it'll help the momentum of keeping us going on the issue of climate change.
I sense a note of optimism in your voice, Congressman. Do you think the climate is changing on the Hill, and that we're more open to passing these kinds of very important pieces of legislation?
Yeah, everything from mining reform. Yeah, I do. I really do. And that optimism is guided by experience as well. I've been to this dance before and get real close, and it doesn't happen. I think the push that we're getting from the public for something to happen is something all of us are feeling, and I'm glad, because it does give us momentum. And then, my partner and better half, Mona, she says that I'm a masochist and an optimist, which I love the pain, but I love what I'm doing. And so I'm always
Well,
optimistic.
listen, we love that you're there putting up the good fight. You're one of our eco warriors, one of our planet protectors.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for this very spirited conversation and leaving us with that note of optimism, because we are looking towards the future. We know what's at stake. We sense the urgency of what we're dealing with. So it's very important to have allies like you in Congress that also sense that urgency. Will continue to fight to protect not just our ocean, but our planet. Thank you.
You know, and to the organizations, and thank you for this and hosting this. Is you know, I tell people that we're not just fighting for our survival, but we're fighting for a generational survival, and we're fighting for a generation that isn't here with us yet.
Sure.
And so I think our fight is a lot more meaningful than sometimes we give ourselves credit for. So
100%.
thank you very much.
Thank you for being with us.